Democracy is very tough to manage, but it's the best form of government.
We must promote unity, stability, and economic justice for everyone.
The question of security is paramount in my mind because women are the high victim of insecurity.
Our diversity is an asset if we know how to use it.
On behalf of the people of Nigeria and indeed Africa, the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly held on the 18th of September 2023 gave Nigeria and Africa the opportunity to bear its mind as a country and as a continent about the challenging global issues confronting Nigeria and Africa through President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's speech, which was not only thought-provoking, but a wake-up call for African leaders to champion a promising future. Join us on the Presidency in Focus on TVNigeria as we x-ray this historical speech. We'll be right back. Thanks for joining us. It's still the Presidency in Focus. And of course, like we said earlier in the introduction, we're going to be bringing you a very historic speech presentation by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And of course, the President is the 16th President of this country that addressed the United Nations Assembly. The general debate of the 78th section of the United Nations General Assembly, which held on the 18th of September this year, was a remarkable event where, simply put, speaking truth to international power. We're going to be dissecting it in phases so that you will actually understand what were the focal points of this speech and what the message is. And of course, joining me, let's introduce to you our special guest, who of course is a political and economic analyst, is also a corporate and public governance consultant, one man who is all about propagating good leadership, good governance in Nigeria. Let's welcome Professor Justus Adewale Ademola. You're welcome, sir.
Good morning, sir.
It's a pleasure to have you
my pleasure
on the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, which held recently, created an opportunity for the President to make certain fundamental statements. I will also say pronouncements, suggestions, strategies, and ideas. But before we start, Professor, how did you take that speech? We're going to be taking the first part, but how did you first of all take the speech?
Thank you very much. I am indeed very, very impressed. Right from the very moment he onboarded the podium. For the first time in the history of Africa and Nigeria, an intellectual generalissimo stood up to represent Africa. What do I mean by that? You see, quite unlike how it has been for Africa and Nigeria, the 78th General Assembly of the United Nations saw a man from the soil of Africa, and particularly from Nigeria, pointing directly and accurately at the powers vis-a-vis the critical issues underpinning Africa's underdevelopment.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. So quickly, we're going to be taking the first part of that speech coming from President Bola Ahmed Tinubu.
This is my first address before the General Assembly. Permit me to say a few words on behalf of Nigeria, my country, on behalf of Africa, my continent, regarding this year's theme. Many proclamations have been made, yet our troubles remain close at hand. Failures in good governance have hindered Africa, but broken promises, unfair treatment, and outright exploitation from abroad have also exerted a heavy toll on our ability to progress.
Okay, so Prof, what do you make from the first part of this speech? Because he said, this is my first address, and he raised very fundamental issues. Let me pick the word exploitation, broken promises, unfair treatment, failures in good governance. What do you think, really?
Thank you very much. If you went through the speech per se, you will see he highlighted from abroad that the issue of broken promises, exploitation, and unfair treatment undermining Africa and subjugating Africa has not been homemade. They were externally infuriated upon us, that they were abroad, being sent across the skies onto Africa, that these were masterminded by foreign nations, foreign countries, influential countries against the fortunes and the nerves of Africa. So you will see, it was the audacity of his presentation that caught my interest. Because you will see, for a man that just won an election and he was just being sworn in, and then opportunistic of appearing at that session, but on getting there, he was able to point it out the way it was. And now looking at their face, you know, there's this syndrome we call complex. You know, ordinarily with complex, inferiority complex, a leader of a nation like Nigeria will have gone there begging, sobering, and understooding. But unfortunately, as Shiwaju got to the United Nations General Assembly, he stood not only tall, he spoke aloud. You understand?
Yes.
So that audacity broke the grounds.
Of course, looking at the speech, he said, many proclamations have been made, yet our troubles remain close at hand. And of course, he talked about, of course, but broken promises, unfair treatment, outright exploitation from abroad.
It was reeling it out to them and highlighting the fact that, behold, the causatic factors are the ones to whom I'm speaking. Exploitations, it has not been Africans that have been exploiting Africa. None of the promises, rehabilitational promises for a nation that was eroded like Africa wouldn't have been made by Africa itself or African leaders. But like nations that were emaciated by wars or war-torn countries. You see, that was the essence of the International Bank for Resettlement and Reconstruction and Development. Do you understand? But unfortunately, countries in Africa of African origin don't control such bank. Like the Bank for Reconstruction and Development never kept to such promises. And as such, Africa has been hoodwinked just in the mirage of open promises without affirmation.
Thank you, Professor, for that analysis there. Well, in case you're joining us, this is from the presidency, taking a look at the United Nations speech made by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Now, in the second part, which was quite interesting, of course, it talked about that today and for several decades, Africa has been asking for the same level of political commitment. So let's take the second part of that speech.
Nations saw that it was in their own interest to help others exceed the rubbles and wasteland of war. Reliable and significant assistance allowed countries emaciated by war to grow into a strong and productive society. The period was a high watermark for trust in global institutions and the belief that humanity had learned the necessary lessons to move forward in global solidarity and harmony. Today, for several decades, Africa has been asking for the same level of political commitment and devotion of resource that described the Marshall Plan. We realize that underlying conditions and causes of economic challenges facing today's Africa are significantly different from those of post-war Europe. We are not asking for identical programs and actions. What we seek is an equal, firm commitment to partnership. We seek enhanced international cooperation with African nations to achieve the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay, Prof. So let's look at this second part. Of course, he started by saying that nations saw that it was in their own interest to help others exit the rubble and wasteland of war.
As Shiwaju categorically said, reliable and significant assistance, not just rabble-rousing, not photographic displays, not just paper commitments, but assistance for rebuilding war-torn nations or underdeveloped nations, but now that are both reliable and significant to production. A production facility that requires as much as $100 million and you are advancing 25 million, how significant is such an input? It will rather return the victim to where he used to be. So, like it was done for other nations, particularly in Europe, because if you read through the history books, you will see the developmental contributions of the United Nations regulated agencies and finance institutions were so much significant that they were able to pull out war-torn countries and emaciated countries from the rubbles of war onto development. But for the African continent, it's never been in that manner. That was why Shiwaju was able and bold to say, like it was done for others, avail us reliable and significant assistance. Not just in the sequence of Africa. You know, there's an aura that goes with Africa. So the moment it is Africa, it is lopsided. The moment it is Africa, it is downtrodden. The moment it is Africa, it is reduced.
Okay, an interesting part to what we just heard now. The president said, we are not asking for identical programs and actions. we don't want to like compare ourselves with you. Okay, what we seek is an equally firm commitment to partnership. What do you think?
Yeah, because, you know, at such a forum, the widely expected sanity will be that you should come like others came. You should come in the ways and forms of others. And you should expect us to do like we have been doing. But the uniqueness of Africa deserves unique attention.
Okay.
But now for its magnitude.
So we need an homegrown.
Homegrown, yes, targeted at Africa. Not for you to stage a developmental scheme for Africa, but with the tentacles of China. But look deeper, look inward, and domesticate it, but with reliable and significant assistance.
But to a large extent, this will also benefit them, because if Africa grows, if they can partner with us.
With the correct perspective.
Looking at our strengths, managing our weaknesses, and working with our strength, it's going to be good for everybody.
Your strength is a mere tent, not until the other party perceives it in the proper way. That was why he was stretching further by saying, behold, view Africa in the proper perspective. Use the appropriate tentacles to view us. Do not view us through the Mediterranean Sea Don't look at us through China, but view us as we are. And at that, extend to us and avail us what is categorically required for our industrial progress.
And of course, he rounded up that other phase that we seek enhanced international cooperation with African nations
to achieve
the 2030 agenda
and sustainable development goals. Is asking for nothing new. You know, if you are following the UNGA, there are master plans, there are schemes. So Ashwaju was locking into that table. He was locking into that same room that has been provided extantly, not newness. So he's only locking onto that and saying, in that same manner, please attend to Africa.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Well, the president's speech were actually encapsulated in 5 important points, and which he highlighted. So let's listen to the first significant point he made.
There are 5 points I want to highlight. First, if this year's theme is to have any importance at all and any impact, global institutions, other nations, and their private sector actors must see Africa as a development priority, not just for Africa, but in the interest of us all as well. Due to both long-standing internal and external factors, Nigerians and Africans' economic structures have been skewed to impede development, industrial expansion, job creation, and the equitable distribution of wealth. If Nigeria is to fulfill its duty to its people, I know, and the rest of Africa, we must create jobs and the belief in a better future for our people. We are pushing for that. We must also lead by example, and we are doing so, to foster economic growth and investors' confidence in Nigeria. I remove the costly and corrupt fuel subsidy while also discarding a noxious exchange rate system in my first few days in office. Other growth and job-oriented firms are in the wings. I'm mindful of the transient hardship that reform can cause. However, it is necessary to go through this phase in order to establish a foundation for durable growth and investment to build the economy our people deserve.
Okay, that was President Bola Ahmed Tinubu with the first point from the 5 points he highlighted at the United Nations General Assembly. And of course, what I'm taking away from there, Prof, is first, if this year's theme is to have any impact at all, global institutions, other nations, and their private sector actors must see African development as a priority, not just for Africa, but in their interests as well. So, Prof, let me take it from this point. The president said, if Nigeria is to fulfill its duty to its people and the rest of Africa, we must create jobs and the belief in a better future for our people. So, I mean, the president was quite emphatic here.
Precedent to that, he said, Nigeria, due to both long-standing internal and external factors, both Nigeria and Africa have economic structures that have been skewed to impede development, to impede industrial expansion, to impede job creation and equitable distribution of wealth. But you see, this skewness wasn't a job conducted and implemented by Africans. They were all imported from overseas. So that's why it's now getting back to the masters that, behold, that which was done several decades ago needs to be undone for us to move ahead. And here, categorically, it's about unskewing the African economic structures to enable job creation, employment generation. Because you would see, we have been concocted to a corner of importation. Everything jumped from overseas. So, and you know, they weren't just commercial or merchandise issues. They were critically designated. And the system down here were streamlined to only open up their mouths and throats to swallow whatever is brought from there.
Well, in that first point, the president was emphasizing on why he removed fuel subsidy. You see that? Okay, which of course intended to bring about some level of reforms and a very progressive development. Let's now listen to the second point of the president.
We welcome partnerships with those who not mind seeing Nigeria and Africa assume larger roles in the global community. The question is not whether Nigeria is open for business. The question is how much of the world is truly open to doing business with Nigeria, and how African is an equal, mutually beneficial manner. Direct investment in critical industries, opening airports to a wider range and larger quantity of African exports, and meaningful debt relief are important aspects of the cooperation we seek.
So, Prof, what do you make from the president's second point?
He was talking and he was speaking to the foundations, particularly about the comfortable partnership Africa needs, not the extant partnership, not the routine partnership we have been exposed to, but now a different form of partnership that will be both benefiting to Nigerians, Nigeria, Africa, and the entire world. And he mentioned something. He said, the question is not whether Nigeria is open for business. Racism has a role to play here. Sentiments, conspiracy, politics, and skilled business, very deep there. But Ashwaji is now saying it's not about you ready to, it's what of the volume of the world that is truly open to doing business with Nigeria and Africa in an equal, mutually beneficial manner. Now, you know, merchandising with Africa from history and records has been one-sided. Because the bulk of what is brought in, when you check the financials, much of the profit and the financial or economic benefit, because what do you make of products that were made and manufactured overseas, but only flown or imported into Nigeria for marketing and distribution? But now, like Ashwaji was saying here, the kind of partnership we are seeking is that will be mutually beneficial. Mutual benefit here is it will be 50-50. Production should take place here. Marketing and distribution should take place here. Not that production will take place elsewhere and come to extinct the scarce effects we have and just dump the materials here for marketing and distribution. But now let it be production oriented so that we don't suffer more.
Yes, interestingly, in that second part, you talked about direct investment in critical industries, opening their ports to a wider range and larger quantity of African exports, and of course, meaningful debt relief. Prof, debt relief.
No, you know, if you are conversant with the export bracket in Nigeria, not many countries, developed countries, the top merchandising countries of the world, have their ports open to our products. There's that widespread discrimination. Whatever is coming from Nigeria, from Africa, they have limitation of destination. But that was what Ashwadi was saying here. See, it is not just about these razzmatazz. But let it be stated that even those nations who have been selective in who brings what into their countries should hear us out here.
Well, it's still the presidency in focus, and we've been trying to take a look, brainstorming and critically analyzing the points made by the president at the United Nations Assembly recently. Well, let's look at the third crucial point the president raised.
This brings me to my third crucial point. Our entire region is locked in protracted battle against violent extremists. In the turmoil, a dark channel of inhuman commerce has formed. Along the route, everything is for sale. Men, women, and children are seen as chattel. Yet, thousands reach the Sahara hot and sand and the Mediterranean cold death in search of a better life. At the same time, mercenaries and extremists with their lethal weapons and vile ideologies invade our region from the north. This harmful traffic undermines the peace and stability of the entire region. African nation will improve our economics so that our people do not risk their life to sweep the floors and streets of other nations. We also shall devote ourselves to disbanding extremist groups on our turf. Yet, to fully contain this threat, the international community must strengthen its commitment to arrest the flow of armed and violent people into West Africa.
Prof, what took, or what actually sparked off my very strong interest in this third point of the president? He said our entire region is locked in protracted battle against violent extremists. Is there a gang up against Africa?
If you check the trend of most of these extended battles and what, you see the American-Iraq war for over 21 years is still ongoing. The concern of security as a fundamental responsibility of any serious-minded government. Because you will see that third highlight of his presentation hampers so much on the issue of insecurity, banditry, kidnapping, extremism, as if they have relocated their base to Africa. Our entire nation is locked in protracted battle against violence. It never started yesterday, not just last decade, it's across decades, and yet the world watches. And being protracted now means there are very fierce power sources behind the whole of this, and they've allowed it to expand and extend and exist across reasonable period. So, and you see, he said, in the turmoil, a dark channel of inhuman commerce has formed. Commerce, fundamentally, commerce should be that of goods and services. But unfortunately, because of what is to be inherited from Africa by supposedly non-inheritance of Africa, what they have done now is to extend their own commerce to human business. Men, women, children are the commodities. What does that mean? Just last week, you overheard the Nigerian Medical Association complaining bitterly about the Japa syndrome of our medical professionals. Canada is busy advertising immigration opportunities for people to move up, to come up. And like Ashwadi was saying, and he was telling them, behold, everything in Africa should not be for sale.
Well, if you look at the last part of that third point, the president said, yet to fully corral this threat, the international community must strengthen its commitment to arrest the flow of arms and violent people into West Africa. There seemed to just be a very systematic, deliberate attempt to cripple the West African.
See, in the movement of materials and matters across the globe, movement of people and movement of arms constitute the greatest threat.
And where the arms coming from?
You see, arms are not meat pie. They are not batteries. Their production are regulated. Yeah. And yet they find their ways and means onto our soils without control. It is not in Africa's responsibility to check where these things are coming from or how they secure their free release from their manufacturers, either legally or illicitly. The international community has a critical role to play in monitoring and moderating production, coding, sales, and transmission to wherever they are meant to be used.
Well, we must really commend the president. This is the first time a Nigerian president or president from the African continent with specific reference to the West African region, speaking truth to the international power community. Because from all indication, it's obvious, though we have our own internal challenges, but again, to a large extent, from what the president is saying, the international powers or foreign powers or Western powers seems to have, systematically and strategically tried to, sow seed of, seed of discord? Now, interestingly, there is a fourth important aspect of the president's speech, which borders on global trust and solidarity, which is to secure the continent's mineral-rich areas from pilfering and conflict. Let's hear the fourth aspect of his speech.
The fourth important aspect of this global trust and solidarity is to secure the continent's mineral-rich areas from pilfering and conflicts. Many such areas have become catacombs of misery and exploitation. The Democratic Republic of Congo has suffered this for decades, despite the strong UN presence there. What happened? The world economy owes the Republic of Congo much but gives her very little. The mayhem visited on resource-rich areas does not respect national boundaries. Sudan, Mali, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, and the list grow on and on and on. The problem also knocks at Nigeria's door. Foreign entities are baited by local criminals who aspire to be petty warlords have drafted thousands of people into servitude to illegally mine gold and other resources. Billions of dollars meant to improve the nation's economy now fuel violent enterprises. If left unchecked, they will threaten peace and place national security at a grave danger.
So, Prof, looking at the fourth important aspect of the president's speech there, it talked about global trust and solidarity, which, of course, it's a very fundamental issue, and the pilfering of the continent's mineral-rich areas.
You will, if you come very categorically to Nigeria, you would agree with me that the protracted war-torn areas of Nigeria, the Zamfara, the Jigawa, the Benue, the Maiduguri, they are areas with some forms of rich, untapped rich mineral resources.
So they are creating conflicts there.
Deliberately. I was with a man on Friday last week, an old Hausa man who claims to be from Jigawa. You get to listen to what this man was saying, that there are international collaborations seeking to sow permanent seeds of discords in those areas so that the businesses of the midnight can go uncheckmated. And what are those businesses? Because you will see, in the space and in the faces of these ongoing wars, non-Nigerians in those areas exploiting, doing and conducting the businesses that cannot be conducted in the daytime, they are internationally dominated. And so there are forces, you see, they are seen just like at the Atlantic Beach in Nigeria. You get there in most cases, you see our naval officers. They will see guys that are pilfering, but yet they will look away. So in DR Congo, the United Nations presence means little or nothing. Yet the acts and the attitudes of evil against Africa goes uncheckmated.
This is interesting, and I think, I hope key United Nations strong members must have taken something back home.
If I may ask you, are you able to separate the key strong members of the UNGA and the controlling nations from the petty warlords that have drafted thousands of people into eternal servitude to illegally mine gold and other resources. They have deserted those areas for these illegal miners to freely operate during ungodly hours.
And this has actually plundered our natural resources. You're still watching the Presidency in Focus on TVNigeria. And of course, we've been looking at the very thought-provoking speech by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu at the 78th United Nations General Assembly. Now, quickly, we look at the fifth part of the president's speech, which borders on climate change and, of course, other issues.
Fifth, climate change severely impacts Nigeria and Africa. Northern Nigeria is honored by desert encroachment, hounded from the north, all are arable lands. Our south is pounded by the rising tide of coastal flooding and erosion. In the middle, the rainy season brings flood that kill and displace multitudes. As I lament death at home, I also lament the grave loss of life in Morocco and Libya. The Nigerian people are with you. African nations will fight climate change, but must do so on fair and just terms. To achieve the need popular consensus, this campaign must accord with overall economic efforts.
Okay, Prof, looking at the fifth part of the president's speech, of course, he came up with the issue of climate change. Yep. And he talked about our south is pounded by the rising tide of coastal flooding and erosion. What do you think?
It's so sad, because while he was in Lagos as the executive governor, he came up with this idea of the encroachment of the Atlantic Ocean at the beach, and successfully Lagos State, in partnership with the Chaguri brothers, were able to put to a large check the natural evil at the Atlantic beach. Because if you get there today, you will see, if you know if you're familiar with the Ahmadu Bello terrain, it's been put to check. So from his experience, and then you will see, if you read downward, the issue of PPP at the UN's level, much can be achieved if truly they are interested. Why can't they look forward to Africa with a view to replicating much of this? And like he said, with PPP, that's why we keep telling Nigerians, the man here, climate change controls, he has the key. Now, PPP is working on a co-Atlantic city. The same PPP can work on desert encroachment, because the greatest cause of Fulani herdsmen wahala is absence of water, lack of water for the cattle to drink. But if the United Nations can be sincere in this way and on this matter, and provide artificial water management, whose resources lie with them.
Just to re-emphasize what you said just now, of course, the president said African nations will fight climate change, but must do so on our own terms.
On our own terms. And what are the terms?
To achieve the needed popular consensus. And this campaign must accord with overall
economic efforts.
Fantastic.
You know, what he drew up there is that it must be mutual. That you seek to do, just like when they were working on the Eco-Atlantic, you will see the MOU were mutually drawn. So if the United Nations is coming up with whatever to alleviate the sufferings on Africa, it mustn't be done overseas. It mustn't be done with the interest of the host communities. It must be done bringing to bear the interests and benefits of Africa and Africans.
It's been quite interesting having you, Professor Justus, on the Presidency in Focus. I want to thank you very much. But we won't end this episode without taking the last part of the President. So let's listen to the President having given 5 very strong, thought-provoking points, highlights. The President encapsulated his speech to wrap it up this way.
In Nigeria, we shall build political consensus by highlighting remedial actions which also promote economic good. Projects such as Green Wall to stop desert encroachment, halting the destruction of our forests by mass production and distribution of gas burning stoves, and providing employment in local water management and irrigation projects are examples of efforts that equally advance both economic and climate change objectives. Continental efforts regarding climate change will register important victories if established economies were more forthcoming with public and private sector investment for Africa's preferred initiatives. Again, this will go far in demonstrating that global solidarity is real and working. To the rest of the world, I say, work with us as true friends and partners. Africa is not a problem to be avoided, nor is it to be pitied. Africa is nothing less than the key to the world's future.
So, Prof, what do you think about how the president...
If we may be categorical,
Yeah.
you hear him, he said, as for Africa, we seek to be neither appendage nor patron. We do not wish to replace old shackles with new ones. It was too categorical, taking out the concept and the premonition of pride. And at the same time, we don't want to be subjugated to the old things we are quite aware of. But we are seeking a pivotal insistence that would make Africa not only grow, but to be beneficial to the entire world. It is a challenge and bringing to bear our democracy and sovereignty, because all these cannot be attended to looking away from the form of governance in Africa. So like the Niger scenario, he drew it in, that the United Nations must not watch Africa of being overtaken or overridden by the boots of the gun. In as much as we are considering our security, climate change, employment generation, who leads the nation, who leads the continent, who leads the people should be of importance and critical concern to the United Nations leadership. So they should at all times look down and consider the sovereignty and democracy of the African people.
Well, I think putting it simply, what the president is saying is let it be a win-win situation. Thank you very much, Professor Justus Adewale Ademola, for coming on the program. We quite appreciate your very unbiased, in-depth analysis of the president's speech at the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And of course, listening to the analysis by Professor Justus, it tells us clearly that the president has shown some level of bravery, sagacity, and the power to lead Nigeria and indeed Africa to the promised land. The president's UNGA speech was indeed bold, daring, diplomatically vocal, underlaid with wisdom and a clear-cut advocacy for practical political and economic solutions to Africa's diverse challenges. Simply speaking, the president spoke truth to global power. Join us again next time for another deep, insightful analysis and discussion on the Presidency in Focus on TV Nigeria. We invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, TV Nigeria 808, and follow us on all our social media platforms, Facebook, TV Nigeria, Twitter, TV Nigeria, Instagram, TV Nigeria 1, and our website, www.tvnigeria.ng. Thanks for watching.